The combine is done and dusted with several big storylines coming out of the week of testing. So obviously we have our draft expert, Ryan McCrystal, here to talk about it. So make sure you stick around. What is up, everybody? I'm Raymond Summerlin. This is Sharp Football Analysis, and I am joined today by our draft expert, Ryan McCrystal, one of the best in the business, to discuss the most interesting storylines coming out of the NFL Combine. I would say a fun NFL Combine, although I continue to see fewer and fewer people participate in the drills, which that hurts my heart. It hurts my soul. What are you going to do? It's the way we're moving forward. But it was still a very interesting and a very, I would say, telling in some ways NFL Combine. What's up, Ryan?
Yeah, you're right about the players not working out. That's the big disappointment. The Combine it's still certainly important because of all the stuff that we don't see. It will always be important because of the medicals and the interviews and all that stuff. But the workouts are becoming slightly less important because if you're not going to put up good numbers, you're not going to put up any numbers. Basically, you're just going to opt out. So yeah, it is becoming slightly less important in terms of what we can actually see, but still some good storylines because it's always fun to see the guys put up the crazy numbers that they do. So there'll always be some interesting stuff that happens.
Yeah, and that was my thing. And they're trying to sell their TV show. I'm not making any jabs at Rich Eisen and Daniel Jeremiah or anything. They do a great job as always. But they were talking about, oh, this is the fastest whatever group of all time. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, you have a self-selected group. Like, I don't know if someone was going to show up and, not run well, then they just now choose not to run. So they're like did Laquan Treadwell run? I can't remember, right? But I remember like all these slow receivers that would have just at this point in time would have just never run. And then you just don't have to deal with all of those conversations, which actually makes, Carnell Tate, who we'll get to in a bit, makes him going out there and running, even though, I don't know how big of a deal that 40 time is for him, but like the fact that he came out and ran in the 4.5s and like made it a story is interesting that he was like, well, I'm just going to come out here and show you what I can do. I wonder if there are some teams that go, yeah, all right, we're fine with that. So it's a whole interesting thing going on here in the Combine. I'm sure we'll get to specifics as we get through this when we talk about individual players, but I do want to mention that your latest post-combine mock draft 2.0 is available at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Make sure you go and check that out. Ryan's one of the best mock drafters in the business, graded as such. So make sure you go and check that out. And like I said, I'm sure we'll get into specifics, but were there a lot of changes coming out of the Combine as a result of the Combine? Obviously, every time we do this, you're going through different scenarios. What if this team picks this player? Then that changes everything downstream from that. But were there any changes like specifically you made, maybe just kind of like more in general as we come out of this Combine?
No, not really. The Combine, it's really important. Draft boards definitely get shaken up by the Combine, the results that we get, but less so at the top. So if you're the type of NFL draft fan who's just following the first round, not much really changes. Teams might, flip-flop one or two players based on getting some numbers back that, slightly favors one guy over the other. But in general, the guys in the first round, we're already expecting, that we've watched them enough. We're already expecting good numbers. They all post good numbers or they don't work out. Nothing changes that much at the top. Lots of changes in my mock draft from the first one that we posted right after the Super Bowl, but that's more just a case of me going back and rewatching players, getting a better feel for strengths and weaknesses and being better able to place them with teams as far as how they fit certain schemes, how they fit certain tendencies of the GMs making the picks, just getting a better feel for the specifics of the players. The first run through, I try to do some of that. I know the players as best I can watching them during the season. But it is sort of like this team needs a receiver, plug in a receiver. And then as you dig into it a little bit deeper, you start to get a better sense of how those players will really fit into the offense, how they fit like I said, the tendencies of the GMs. The GMs have been around a long time. You start to get a good feel for, what types of traits they're going to be drawn to. So most of the changes in the mock draft, which I think I probably changed 23 of the picks or something like that. It's mostly for that, much less about the Combine, which, that's not to say the Combine doesn't matter, but it matters a lot more for the day 2 and day 3 prospects than it does for those guys who are more or less already. We've got 40 or so guys who were in the first round mix before the Combine, and most of them are still right there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great way to look at it. But I also think coming out of the combine, it was interesting that some of the best performers were these players that we don't really know what to do with because we don't know about positional value. And so Sonny Styles is definitely on that list because Sonny Styles obviously absolutely demolished the combine. We also have Arvell Reese, who had a really good combine. You had previously had him number 2 overall. He moved down a little bit because you put David Bailey there. That's more just, I think, like what are they interested in? But obviously, Arvell Reese is an interesting test case because we don't. Is he going to be like the next Micah Parsons? Is he going to be an off ball? We don't really know what we're getting out of him. And then even guys, I mean, Jeremiyah Love obviously runs an absurd time, looks good, and we know who Jeremiyah Love is. And then Caleb Downs didn't test, but we just know, we talked about it in the first kind of draft talk we did after your first mock, is that everybody pretty much just knows this is the best player in the draft. And so we're trying to figure out where he fits in. As you look at, those are the guys that did really well at the combine. Those are the guys that everybody generally believes are super talented, but they're also playing at, depending on what you think of Arvell Reese, positions that are not super valuable. And so I wonder if that, because of just kind of the way the draft is, we know Mendoza's going 1-1. We don't even think that would be a traditional number 1 overall pick in a normal draft year. It's just kind of the way it works out. Are we going to see a draft this year that pushes up and prioritizes these guys that maybe we had questions about, or more importantly, in a normal year, the positional value would push them down boards?
Yeah, definitely. I think the 3 players that are going to get drafted higher than you would guess based on their position is Downs, Love, and Styles. Off-ball linebackers, running backs, safeties, arguably the 3 least valuable positions. Maybe you could put center in there. We don't have an elite center in this year's class, but at least 3 of the 4 least valuable positions, you could argue. But they're going to go in the top 10. They might all 3 of them might go in the top 5. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, with Caleb Downs, he's sort of in his own category because we talked about it earlier. He's just kind of a special safety. I think he's my number 1 prospect in the draft. I think I've been doing this a little over 20 years now. I think he's a top 10 pick every single year. He's just that type of a player. The other 2, Jeremiyah Love and Sonny Styles, they're special prospects for their position. They're both, elite players of those positions. The reason they're going to go so high, though, I think has a little bit more to do with the lack of value at the traditional positions. I think we also talked about in the last podcast we did about the draft, how this is a really deep class of edge rushers, but it's not a great class if you're drafting in the top 10 and you need like a top tier edge rusher to come in and start wrecking things on day 1. Tons of guys to choose from, but there's just, it's kind of hard to pick who's going to go at the very top. I happen to like David Bailey, but some people, are not in agreement on that. Arvell Reese, who you mentioned, we'll talk about him, and I'll get to him in a second because I sort of put him in a separate category of those elite players. But it's basically that there's a lack of talent at the positions that you want to draft. So these teams at the top who aren't very good just think, well, we can't miss on this pick. So let's just take Sonny Styles and just get a day 1 green dot linebacker. And, he's going to be a good starter for us right out of the gate. It's probably a better route to go than drafting someone who, even if they do reach their ceiling, probably needs a few years of development, and you're probably fired by the time that happens anyway. So I think a few GMs are just going to take that route. Arvell Reese, who you mentioned that category, I kind of put him in a different category because he's going to play on the edge. There's no question about it. Someone who's going to put him on the edge. He played as an off-ball linebacker at Ohio State, so that's in the mix, but that's going to be the fallback plan. You're not going to draft someone like Arvell Reese, who might be capable of playing on the edge, in the top 10 or, probably the top 5. You're not going to draft him there and then tell him to play off-ball linebacker, the less valuable position. You're going to try him on the edge first, which he hasn't done at Ohio State. I put him in a different category of the other 2 because I don't think he's as safe as those other guys like Downs, Love, and Styles. Yeah, those positions might not be as valuable, but they're going to start day 1, and I think they're probably going to contend for like Pro Bowl caliber status as rookies. They're really polished and ready to go. Reese was a 1-year starter at Ohio State as an off-ball linebacker, and now someone's going to ask him to play on the edge. Like, by definition, that is the most risky. A 1-year starter is always risky. Now you got a 1-year starter who's changing positions. This is a very high risk player. We all saw what he did at the combine. Crazy athletic traits. It could work out, but go back and look at the edge rushers who dominated the combine, who didn't have a ton of experience at the position. It is a long list of busts. So the bust factor is high. I'm not saying that I'm going to have Arvell Reese like outside of my top 10 prospects. I'm going to rank him very high because, especially in a class where you don't have a lot of polished players at premium positions, you're still going to rank the freak athletes really high. It makes perfect sense for someone to draft him. I just don't quite put him in the Downs, Love, Styles category because there's such a high bust factor with him. He might be terrible. You might ask him to switch positions and he just can't do it. Because even as an off-ball linebacker, he made a ton of mistakes, as you would expect from a first-year starter. It's normal that he has those issues on tape, but there's risk involved. Don't assume you're getting a superstar day one, the team that drafts Arvell Reese.
Yeah, it really does hurt me that as a Penn State fan that we're having all of this Ohio State conversation, but it is what it is. On Jeremiyah Love, I think it's him. Maybe we talked in Slack as this was going on, and you had previously in the first mock draft had him going to the Chiefs at 9, which I do think makes a lot of sense. But my message to you is he's not getting to 9. Like, that's just not. And I wonder how much that changes what we see now moving forward in free agency, because there are actually some running backs available in free agents here. If you're the Chiefs, you have to be more aggressive with Kenneth Walker, for instance, because you don't think Jeremiyah Love is going to get to you at 9, because as we talked about on that first podcast we did after your first mock draft, like the depth at running back this year just isn't it. I like Jadarian Price. I actually thought he looked good at the combine, despite the testing numbers being more middling. That's what you probably have expected from Price, but I thought he looked good. Obviously, just to introduce some Penn State players, I'm going to be a homer for Kaytron Allen, but I do genuinely think that Kaytron Allen is a good player, right? But like, these are not solving your issues if you are somebody that really needs a running back. And so I do think this Jeremiyah Love discussion of how high he goes in the draft is not just a draft question. I do think it's a free agency question, and we might see teams be more aggressive than otherwise they thought they would be. If you're the Chiefs and you think Love falls to you at 9 and you're happy with that pick, maybe you just take him. If not, maybe you have to go out and, like I said, pay Kenneth Walker to really help your offense, especially if we're getting Mahomes coming back from a serious knee injury. So I do think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, that's a factor. I think what's most likely to happen, because we're starting to see with running backs, like we're going through cycles because they're able to stay in college longer. So it kind of seems like a lot of the high profile teams have kind of synced up just by coincidence, that we're seeing a lot of players stay in school. This year is a really down class because everybody who could get a good NIL contract went back for another year because they're going to get paid more than they would if they were a 3rd round pick. But then next year, we're probably going to have a pretty good running back class because a bunch of guys stayed in school, where normally you're kind of always seeing the redshirt sophomores, redshirt juniors coming out. Because if you've been a starting running back for 2 years, you got to get to the league as fast as possible and get started getting paid traditionally. Now, you might as well stay in school. You're going to make more money. At least this year, you're going to make more money in school than you would if you were a 3rd round pick. And then you got to wait to really get paid. So I think what teams are going to start to do is for this year, if they're in that boat where like maybe we can get Love, like the Chiefs, maybe we can get Love, but we got to be prepared if we can't. Obviously, someone's going to pay Kenneth Walker. He's going to get paid. But I think what normally teams are going to do in that situation, like the Chiefs, will probably see them sign someone to a short-term deal and just be like, okay, if we don't get Love, we're fine for a year. We'll either get Love and add him to the mix this year, or there's going to be a bunch of guys available next year and we'll get our future running back next year. And because it'll be a deeper class, we might even be able to get him in the 2nd or 3rd round because there'll just be more available. So that's how I would approach it, at least if I were the GM. If you love Kenneth Walker, go ahead and pay him. But other than that, sign a short-term guy that you're okay with. Maybe you get Love, maybe you don't. Maybe you fill the need next year.
Yeah, I mean, that maybe the next year's class is going to be better. I guess it works out better for running backs than it does for quarterbacks, but it is always
for sure.
It is always one of those things. But yeah, I think that part of it, that NIL part of it for all positions, but I think specifically for running backs is very interesting, because there are running backs in this class that, I mean, the Penn State guys, both of them, Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton, probably should have been in the last class, got paid. Nick Singleton might have made the most money he's going to make in his career last year at Penn State. That might have been his biggest paycheck he'll get in his career. I hope that's not the case. I like Nick Singleton, and this injury's been tough for him in the pre-draft, but that's kind of where we are in the NIL. So it's an interesting it's an interesting change. And obviously running backs are more important in college than they are in the NFL, at least in this version of the NFL. That is one of the things as we talk about position values. Position value changes as we go and as the NFL changes. And we talk about safety as not being that important. And certainly the money paid to safety suggests that NFL teams still view it as not as important, but it does seem to be getting more and more important as we move forward, especially if you can have one of those skeleton key at type safety. So just something to always keep in mind. What about some potential top picks, 10 picks, sliding? Obviously, Ruben Bain, I think, is the name that everybody would be talking about coming out of the combine. We get to have yet another year of top 10 pick arm length conversation. So we're really excited for that. I'm sure Will Campbell is excited for all the memes of him and Ruben Bain in an AI video against each other with TRX arms. I assume that someone's already done that. If not, there's your free viral post for the day. But yeah, like we're having this conversation with Ruben Bain. We're going to have it, I think, all the way through the draft. I know you moved him down in the mock draft, but that was more to do with just kind of like you talked about earlier, what happens in mocks than anything with the arm stuff, right?
Yeah, it had nothing to do with the arms. I mean, we talked about how we were expecting his arms to measure in under 31 inches on the last pod that we did because Dane Brugler had already reported that he had been measured and he was going to have, I forget what it was at the combine, but slightly under 31 inches, which is very, very short arms for the position. It's a factor. You can't ignore it, especially since he doesn't have like crazy athletic traits. Like if Arvell Reese had those types of arms, but then he ran the way he did, you'd be more forgiving. With Ruben Bain, it's you got to factor it in a little bit more because he's trying to win with strength a little bit more than with pure speed. So you got to think about it. It puts him in the mix. Obviously, he's young. He was really productive for a couple of years there at Miami, so he's still going to get drafted high. But it could be a factor if he doesn't go in the top 10. That could be a reason why a team's just not willing to invest that type of resources or that type of draft capital into a player with a pretty big red flag on the resume. Because you don't want to draft an outlier in the top 10 typically. You don't want to spend that kind of money on him. Some other guys who could be sliding. I mean, I already mentioned Arvell Reese. He's not sliding out of the top 10, but because of that lack of experience and because he is also kind of an outlier, I wouldn't be shocked if he slid outside the top 5, and that's like one of a draft day slide that we start talking about. It's in the mix of things that could happen. Also, the 2 top offensive tackles, Spencer Fano and Francis Mawinoa, they seem to be the consensus top 2 offensive tackles in this class. There's a bunch of guys who are in the first round mix, but none of them are elite. Maybe, I mean, it's a premium position. So if a team falls in love with someone, both of those guys are on the younger side. I believe they were true juniors. So, you could talk yourself into the growth potential of either of those guys. They also both played on the right side in college. Spencer Fano has talked about, he started his career on the left side, then switched back to the right side where he had played right tackle in high school also. And he's talked about being more comfortable on that side. Some teams care about left versus right side more than others. Again, it sort of comes down to personal preference, whether that matters, but it's another thing in the conversation of what could lead to them sliding a little bit. The right team needs a left tackle and they're not comfortable moving a guy over, could cause them to fall a couple slots. I think those are the guys, Bain and the 2 offensive tackles that are, frequently in the top 10 are probably the most likely candidates to not actually end up there in April.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be offensive line is such a premium need for so many teams. And it doesn't seem like this draft doesn't have the top end talent you would want, especially at left tackle, as you said. And so it'll be interesting to see how teams handle that. All right. We mentioned this at the top with Carnell Tate and just not running. I mean, it wasn't a terrible 40 time. He didn't run a 4.65 or something like that. Wasn't the great 40 time. Does this matter for you? I know you still had Tate as your first wide receiver off the board in your mock draft. Do we really think that this is going to be a massive negative for him as we move forward?
Nope. Doesn't matter. No one cares. Short and sweet answer to that one. It doesn't matter. Now, he might not be the first wide receiver off the board because the top 3 guys are pretty different players.
Yeah.
Tate is a pure outside receiver. You could potentially teach him to work from the slot. He's a good route runner, so I'm sure he could do some work from the slot, but he's an outside receiver who's going to stretch the field. He's a great route runner, and that's how he creates separation. He was slow in college and created separation constantly against good players. So he's going to continue to do that in the NFL. You'd prefer to have a guy like that. And there's some similarities in how he was used at Ohio State to Chris Olave among the Ohio State receivers. That's probably the closest comparison in terms of how they were used in the offense. Olave ran much faster. You'd rather have him run fast, but ultimately the reason why these Ohio State receivers have been so good at making the transition to the NFL is their routes are incredible. They're coming in with running routes like veterans, which you don't see from every college offense. There are many colleges offense that are really simplified for the wide receivers. They're not doing nearly as much as they've done in the Ohio State offense under Ryan Day. So these guys are coming out so polished in that regard that you almost can't fail when you have reliable hands and you're that good as a route runner. The lack of speed, like I said, maybe it limits his ceiling a little bit, but he's going to get drafted very high because you know what you're getting. There's so much trust in a guy like that who has good hands and good route running ability. I don't think anyone was shocked. And, like you said, you mentioned that guys are not working out. A lot of guys are choosing to not run. I think there's a little bit of a boost to the guys who just went out there and ran. Even if you posted a time that's not great, I think a lot of GMs are saying, hey, he went out there and competed. Like, I kind of like that about him. And so there's sort of like it gives you a little trust and sort of like the mental side of the game with him, that he's not afraid to go out there and put out a mediocre number because he trusts that, the total package is there, that he's willing to go out there and compete and show you what he's got.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real football guy take, but these are football guys that we're talking about and trying to predict what they're going to do. And so, like, that's the deal of it. And the other part about it is that it's not like the other top wide receivers showed out. They chose not to test. Jordan Tyson didn't test, also didn't even do drills, I believe. I don't believe I saw him on the field doing drills. Mekhi Lemon didn't test. There are all sorts of reports that Mekhi Lemon did not interview well. In fact, there are some reports that he interviewed about as poorly as anybody ever has. I don't know if those are true, obviously, but that matters. That's something that's important. Denzel Boston didn't run, had a middling vertical. Casey Concepcion didn't test. Like, you look at all of the other like names that you might talk about in that list, and those last two are not, I don't think, at the same level as like Lemon and Tyson, but like we're talking about guys that also didn't help themselves in the combine. So how are you gonna really move down Carnell Tate? A guy I didn't mention in that group though that I do think might have helped himself a little bit is Omar Cooper Jr., 4.42 40. Any thoughts on him? Obviously, as a Penn State fan, I have really negative feelings toward. I actually don't. I'm happy they won that game. I'm happy they won the national championship. I'm very happy when any Big Ten team not named Ohio State wins anything. So I'm very fine. I'm very fine with everything that happened. But he made an amazing catch against Penn State. Obviously, getting the crowd loved him in Indy, as you might expect. So obviously, a good combine for him. Does this help him out, do you think?
Yeah, this is an interesting conversation because it obviously didn't hurt. He put up good numbers. It probably helps a little bit that he went out there and competed. Like we said, a bunch of the wide receivers didn't. So, it sort of bumped his name up in terms of he's one of the few receivers that we can talk about. So like he's at the forefront, and that it matters more to us in the media because we need to talk about stuff. We're not going to talk about Jordan Tyson who didn't do anything, right? We didn't learn anything, but it still does matter because the scouts, they already know what they're going to see from these guys. Like, they don't get surprised by what happens in Indy, but there's still a lot of coaches who don't know these players all that well yet. And if it comes down to it and, you're deciding between some wide receivers and a coach was at Indy and saw Omar Cooper and was impressed, that's his first impression. Now, his first impression of some of these other guys is, well, you didn't run, you didn't compete. And so that's one of those, like, where maybe it shouldn't matter, but it kind of does because like your first impression does matter. That's where the combine trying to sort out how much of it matters gets tricky because it's a case by case basis. If a coach has a strong input and he was impressed by Omar Cooper, it could matter. For me, what his workout didn't matter at all. To me, it almost raised more red flags because he has the profile of someone who should be really dangerous after the catch, and he's not. He played in an offense that should produce after the catch, lots of quick passes in that Indiana offense where he had opportunities to run after the catch. And he did have some big plays when he caught the ball and had, plenty of room to run, but he didn't really create for himself after the catch. His route adjusted numbers, his route adjusted yards after the catch, only 3% above expected this year. His route adjusted catch rate, 0.4% below expected. He put up numbers because that was a great offense that he was playing in. Great play calling. and Heisman winning quarterback playing with Eliza Sherratt, tons of talent on that offense. So he put up numbers, he made plays, but we dig a little bit deeper, it was like kind of ordinary. And so now you see these numbers that look like legit numbers for a guy who could be in the first round conversation. For me, when you see those things, that kind of raises red flags. Now I'm like, okay, the numbers are there, but like you had every opportunity to put up huge numbers in college, given what was surrounded by, and you clearly have the athletic traits. So why didn't it all come together? Why was it more flashes of highlights than consistent production against everybody? Because he was very up and down. Obviously, there were highlights. You mentioned the Penn State game. I mean, that's one of the highlights of the whole college football season. So he can make great catches.
Of the last 10 years of college
football.
football.
I mean, it was an incredible catch.
Yeah.
He probably deserves more credit for that than Mendoza, even though it was sort of like Mendoza's Heisman moment. But just
legitimately, if you have not watched that catch, because he got both feet, like it was an NFL catch, even. It was incredible what he did on the back line. As a Penn State fan, I will just, all right, brother. Like that's
good wild play.
Good job.
But it just makes you think like, okay, why weren't you better then? If this is the type of athleticism you have, where was the crazy production with your Heisman winning quarterback? So that's how I would look at it. Not every team is going to look at it. Some coaches, some GMs are going to just be impressed with the numbers, say that the production on the field was good enough, and he's still going to get drafted among the top 50 picks, I think. But for me, I look at it as a red flag.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think this wide receiver class is kind of chock full of those. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of where people land with a lot of these guys. Speaking of a group with red flags, let's talk about the quarterbacks a little bit. Did the combine bring any clarity, do you think, to the quarterback class? Obviously, we know who the number one quarterback is. We know who the number one overall pick is. There's no real debate about that. But after that gets tricky, you still had Ty Simpson as your next guy going to the Steelers. You've had that down for the first two mocks, but I mean, obviously we'll see what happens as we move through this process. But did anything happen in Indy that really changed your view, or do you think changed the view of teams?
Yeah, I think the quarterback class overall pretty much helped themselves. I mean, Mendoza's, like you said, he's going number one overall. Simpson, I've put him to the Steelers in the mock draft just because it seems like enough teams like him that he's probably going in the first round somewhere.
And it feels like a Steelers-y thing to do. So there you go.
Yeah, it does. I kind of wish I had somewhere else to put him, because I'm also like, they just did this with Kenny Pickett and it didn't work out. So like, are they really going to do it again? I don't know. It's sort of just a placeholder for right now. I don't have a ton of confidence in that selection, but it feels like he belongs in the first round somewhere. But I think Garrett Nussmeier and Drew Aller helped themselves. They were two of the biggest fallers this year. Absolutely. But they both dealt with injuries. That was a part of why. And Aller also just sort of had the general collapse of the Penn State football program all around him. You certainly can't put that on his shoulders. Yeah, I mean, you can't put all of that on Drew Aller's shoulders. Absolutely. Obviously, the fact that he didn't play great was a factor, but he didn't cause the loss to Northwestern all on his own. Yeah. So they looked good. Like they went out and looked like we probably would have expected them to look if they entered last year's draft and showed up at last year's combine. So they're not going to go in the first round, but they're probably going to get drafted on day 2 now, because I think a lot of teams are going to look at it and say, maybe we just need to throw out their 2025 seasons and sort of just go back and look at it as now, like, you're getting a guy that we thought might be a first round pick at a lesser value in round 2. And there's a bunch of teams that need quarterbacks that aren't going to be able to get with them in round 1, because there's nobody worthy of it outside of Mendoza, really, and maybe Simpson, I guess. So I think that they're going to get drafted and probably go to a place where they're going to have a chance to play. And who knows, it could work out, because we were relatively excited about both of those guys entering the season. And then there's also Taylon Green from Arkansas, who's
have to talk about him. Yeah.
He is a tough one. He's had moments where he's looked really good. You could call him a project because obviously the athletic traits are crazy, but also he's played a lot of football at Boise State and Arkansas. So like, he should probably be a little more polished than he is if it's going to work out for him at quarterback. But early day 3, you got to give him a chance to play quarterback, because there just aren't too many guys at that position that have the talent to do it, or that have that type of athletic traits. So you got to try it out at least. There's going to be talk about him switching positions, obviously, because he clearly has the athletic traits to be a pretty dangerous wide receiver. I know like Terrell Pryor is going to get brought up with him as a
Mhm.
guy who transitioned late in his career and it ended up working out. But that's Terrell Pryor is the outlier. It usually doesn't work out. Cordell Stewart, another one, like that's the outlier. It doesn't usually work out for those types of guys. Antoine Randall, another guy who it worked out for. Most of the time it looks like it did when Matt Jones was drafted in the first round after playing quarterback. Like
Yeah.
The transition's hard. There's a lot of nuances to playing the position to succeed at a high level that most guys don't get it. So for me, if I'm a GM, he's on my board as a quarterback. If we want to take a flyer on a guy in the 4th round, I'm excited about drafting him and giving him a couple years to develop. And, maybe you get a chance to see him play down the road. That's how I would approach it with him.
Remember Braxton Miller and how great he looked in
yeah, another one.
One-on-ones in the Senior Bowl. Do you remember that? The thing about, and I want to have these numbers. I just want to say them because it's wild what Taylon Green did athletically. So he's 6'6", 227. He ran a 4.3 640 with a 43.5-inch vertical jump and an 11'2" broad jump. If you're height and weight adjusting that, especially, we are in very rare territory as athletes go. But then you watch the combine and you get back to him just trying to throw a simple drop, a slant, and he put it on target. He's got a great arm, but the footwork was just a mess. Everything's a mess. And like you said, it's not like it's not even an Anthony Richardson situation where he had played what Anthony Richardson played, 8-9 games, something ridiculous like that. Like Green's he played a lot of football. So yeah, it'll be an interesting conversation with him, but those athletic numbers, they're obviously wild. Any combine winners, I guess. Well, let's be positive. Let's finish on a positive. Any combine winners? Anybody we really want to talk about here?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's not a lot of winners in terms of 1st round prospects, just because like most of these guys are already in the 1st round conversation because we know that they're good athletes and then they go out there and they prove it. But one guy that's going to get drafted in the 1st round that I really do think helped himself is Dylan Thieneman, the safety from Oregon. I think he really helped himself with the athletic testing that he put up because he's going to be in my top 10 prospects when we eventually put that big board out. I already thought he was worthy of being a 1st round safety. He played at Purdue for a couple of years where he was mostly used in the deep secondary as a traditional free safety, where he showed he had a ton of range back there, great at reading the quarterback. Then he transferred to Oregon for this past season where he played kind of a hybrid role, but was really more of a strong safety playing in the box. But he wasn't really a traditional strong safety, where in the NFL, you see a lot of strong safeties who will play in the box and play in the slot and then sometimes drop back and play in the deep secondary. He was kind of just doing in the box or playing back as free safety in like 2 high coverage looks and just alternating between those positions. He doesn't have a lot of reps in the slot, which if you're going to play strong safety in the NFL, like I said, teams are going to want you to be able to slip over into the slot and guard either a slot receiver or a tight end. And so that was kind of a question mark on Thieneman's resume, which it still is because we haven't actually seen him do it. But after seeing those testing numbers, there's no doubt about it. He has the athleticism to do it. And he's great in the deep secondary. He's good in the box, a little undersized for playing in the box. I think I would view him as more of a free safety. But seeing those testing numbers makes you a heck of a lot more confident that he can learn the slot role because the traits are there to be able to do it. He tested like a cornerback, really. Like you could almost wonder, like, could he even slide out and be an outside cornerback with those numbers that he put it up? You're not gonna ask him to do it, but it does give you some hope that there's even extended versatility that you could use in a pinch if you needed to. So that versatility always helps boost guys' stock. It just raises the floor of what this guy can be, because even if he ends up being a backup and you've got a guy with those types of athletic traits, you love having versatility in your backups. So like we think these guys are going to hit their ceiling, but ultimately we know most of them aren't, and you're going to end up with some 1st rounders who are spot starters and whatnot. So even in the 1st round, you give a little bit of a boost to a guy that you think has versatility. So Thieneman, I don't think I had him in my 1st round mock draft in the initial one, even though I personally like him. I wasn't sure he was going to be viewed that high in the league. I'm now confident he's a 1st round pick because those numbers remove some of the doubt that we would have had not having seen him really play in the slot.
And he's one of those that, I don't know how, obviously I'm a layman. I'm not a coach. I'm not a GM. I'm not a quote unquote football guy. So I not going to say that I watch these drills with the most trained eyes, but a lot of times you watch those drills and you go, all right. He was one of the guys that as you watch the drills that they were doing, you went, oh, that's different, right? Like that's special what he's doing and how smooth he was as a mover and how he was able to flip his hips. And like you said, even like the cornerback discussion, a lot of these on-field drills, I personally think the running back on-field drills are the best ones, especially the like vision drills where you have to move left and right, see how fluid they are, things like that. I like those a lot. And a lot of times they've led me to look again at a prospect and go, I didn't know about you. This is very, very interesting. Jam Miller might be that guy for me this year. Although you and I had a conversation, we don't know what to do with Jam Miller. I don't know if you ever, we're going to have to watch a lot more Jam Miller. We'll get to that later. We'll talk about, you and I will have offline conversations about Jam
Miller. I mean, that's a great example of like what I was talking about at the top. It's not really the first round players who are helped or hurt. It's the day 2 and day 3 guys. Jam Miller, he was terrible. Like he was not a good running back for Alabama this year, but he looked really good at the combine and he was playing through an injury. So it's going to make people go back and reconsider him. Maybe he should be viewed a little bit differently. That's the type, like, we're not talking about Jam Miller here because a lot of people listening probably aren't super familiar with him.
I care. Us dynasty nerds, we care.
Oh yeah. But yeah, those are the types of guys who are the actual, like if we were really going to deep dive, those are the actual winners. The guys who didn't perform that well during the season or like played at a small school and went out and make people want to go back and take a second look. Those are the types that really won the weekend.
And I mean, continuing the running back, I know nothing about Mike Washington Jr. From Arkansas. I didn't watch much of the dying days of Arkansas football this year, but obviously he comes out and does what he did at the combine, which was a 4.33, something like that. That comes out and runs it. And so now you're like, okay, I'd like to know more information about this guy. And so guys like that, like you say, as we get deeper in, especially if you're a fantasy guy and you're getting deeper into these positions and trying to identify second and third round rookie picks, this is a really interesting place to start. And actually, if you head over to Sharp Football Analysis, I actually did all of the combine measurements for every quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Those are available at Sharp Football Analysis. I put them all onto various sortable tables, searchable tables for you over at Sharp Football Analysis. So make sure you check that out. Also available at Sharp Football Analysis, Ryan's latest mock draft 2.0. Updated post-combine thoughts on that, but also just thoughts as we move through this draft season. We will have another mock draft from our other mock draft expert, Brendan Donahue, that'll come out later this week as well. All your mock draft content you need from two of the best in the business. Again, it's not just me saying that. It's graded out. Two of the best in the business. That'll be available later on this month. We'll end up getting the big board, as Ryan mentioned. Dylan Thieneman will be high on that big board from him. Again, I'm not just saying it. Rated as one of the best big boards in the industry. All of that available at Sharp Football Analysis, along with team needs, a whole bunch of draft content, a whole bunch of free agency content coming up in the next couple weeks. So make sure you check that out. And make sure you subscribe to our newsletter where you'll get all of that delivered directly to your inbox. Also subscribe to this podcast. We're going to have a lot more podcasts coming out as we get through this period, free agency, the draft, all of that. We got a lot of work to do, Ryan, over the next 2 months, but I know like me, you're excited. You're excited for this fun time of the NFL calendar before we get into the doldrums of May, June, and July. And so, yeah, we're excited, right? We're excited for this next run.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is fun. Now that the combine's over, we start getting the team visits and whatnot. And that's when we start to get some real rumors. So yeah, the next 6 weeks or so is really fun.
The smoke screens go up and we start to decide if we actually believe those pro day numbers or not. Oh, it's fun. What a time. We start doing adjustments for pro day 40s. What a time to be alive. All right. That's it for us. Like I said, head over to the website, ton of draft content up there, ton of free agent content. Sign up for the newsletter, subscribe wherever you find us. We appreciate it. We'll be back to talk with you real soon.